The video that I have compiled is an excerpt from Rupert Sheldrake's lecture given on science and God. That video is about to play in just a second. Before the video starts, I'd like to explain this. In our scientific community, there's often a gap between materialism and spirituality. Often as someone who is spiritual, someone who sees spirituality, someone who believes in a certain religion or has a spiritual sense or a spiritual backing of some sense. Often what we've done as spiritual people, whether that be Christian or whether that be whatever, is that we've allowed materialistic worldview, the materialistic worldview, to take center in our scientific community. We've allowed for this kind of diversity of, if you're spiritual, then keep your spirituality here, keep your God here, and let science do its thing over there. I think this is a very dangerous thing that we've allowed to happen. I feel that science and God are completely compatible and work best when science is in an effort to try to find out the essence of God, if there is a God. I think that a strictly materialistic, dogmatic worldview of a scientific community is a very dangerous thing. This video that Rupert is about to explain explains how this worldview came about and how it structures our scientific community today and how it's dangerous. So with that being said, the video is about to play is going to be a lot more informative than I am. So keep that in mind.
What I want to do is look at the key issues as I see them as a result of going through this path and thinking about these things. The key difference, it seems to me, between an atheist and a theist or religious worldview is to do with the nature of consciousness. That is the complete key on which it all hinges. An atheist world, like a theist world, is one that's rationally ordered. Most atheists are materialists. They believe in the materialist philosophy of nature. Nature's governed by universal laws. Most materialists believe they were all there at the moment of the Big Bang. Timeless laws, principles of reason or order. That the whole of the universe is bound together by a universal energy. All energy can be interconverted. The whole universe has a unified source of energy. The whole universe is one unified being. That's why it's called a universe. Everything holds together. All of these are things that are part of traditional religious worldviews, and in the 17th century they were built into science on the basis of a kind of scientific theology. But the big difference is that for an atheist, the whole of this universe is unconscious. It's unconscious machinery. The world's a machine, the earth's a machine, animals and plants are machines, and we're machines. We're lumbering robots, in the words of Richard Dawkins. Our brains are genetically programmed computers. So we live in an unconscious world. The whole world out there, all those galaxies, all the stars are completely unconscious. It's just unconscious matter. And we happen to be conscious for reasons that are obscure. But basically, we live in an unconscious world. Whereas for a religious person in any tradition, the world is permeated by a greater consciousness than our own, to which our own consciousnesses are open, which we can experience through mystical experiences, and which is the background to the very existence of our own minds in the first place. That there's a greater consciousness in the universe, which in different traditions is framed and interpreted in different ways, but the reason anyone believes in God at all, or any spiritual reality, is because of experience, experiencing the presence of a greater mind or consciousness than our own. Now, how did we get to this position of an atheistic worldview that essentially creates an atheistic universe that's just a machine? Well, I'm just going to go very briefly over the history of this because it's absolutely key to understanding why we're in the situation we're in today and why all of us have been influenced by these different thoughts without necessarily knowing why or how, or not even knowing what influences have worked upon us. In the 17th century, the scientific revolution that started science as we know it was a revolution precisely because it denied what everyone had believed before. In the Middle Ages, in Christian Europe, among Christians and Jews and Muslims, the general view was that nature is alive. The earth is alive, Mother Earth. The whole universe is alive. The anima mundi, the soul of the universe, the soul of the world, permeates all things. Animals and plants are truly alive. They're organisms with souls. The very word animal comes from the Latin word anima, which means soul. So it was completely taken for granted by everybody, following the philosophy of Aristotle and St. Thomas Aquinas and the Arab philosophers, that we lived in a living world. The stars were intelligent beings. Each star had its own angel, its own intelligence as part of it. So when people looked at the sky, they saw a sky full of the presence of God, with every star and every planet being a living being with an intelligence of its own. The 17th century revolution said, no, that's not the way it is. The universe is made of unconscious matter, which is just like a big machine. The universe is like a clockwork machine. Stars are just made of matter like anything else. Animals and plants are not living beings with their own souls. They're machines. And human bodies are machines too. And this was the mechanistic theory of nature. When it was first formulated by René Descartes in France, who first had this vision in 1619, Descartes made a sharp separation. He didn't deny God and angels. He said God, angels, and human spirits are immaterial. The realm of spirit is immaterial, totally outside space and time, nothing to do with matter and nature. Nature is made of unconscious matter organized mechanically, pushed by forces in accordance with mathematical laws. The human body is a machine, and the human mind is the only thing in nature which is not mechanical. It's immaterial spirit. It shares its nature with angels and God, and interacts with the machinery of the body in a small region of the brain, the pineal gland. Modern theories of Cartesian dualism are similar, except the supposed seat of interaction shifted a couple of inches into the cerebral cortex. But this theory created a duality between humans and the rest of nature. We're conscious, the rest of nature is mechanical, purely mechanical. Our bodies are mechanical too. It created a split between science and religion. Religion gets angels, God, and the human spirit and morality. Science gets the entire physical universe. And it created the famous split between mind and body. The mind and the body are two completely separate principles. That's not what anyone had believed before. So this was the dualism which enabled science and religion to go on more or less in harmony with each other, and is still the view of many scientists today who are religious. They keep them in completely separate compartments. In the 19th century, there were many people who said, two basic principles are too many. We don't want matter and spirit. There should just be one principle. So some people said, okay, there's only one thing, and that's spirit. And that's the philosophy of idealism. Everything is consciousness. Matter is sort of dumbed down mind. And that was a very popular and influential philosophy in 19th century Europe. The other school of thought were materialists. They said, no, there's no such thing as spirit, there's just matter. And that, at one stroke, got rid of angels and God. They just vanish entirely from the world picture. It leaves human minds, but then human minds are nothing but the activity of the brain. And that's the situation we're in today. This is the position held by probably 90% of academics, 95% of scientists, or at least in public. This is what they have to pretend to believe. Most medical students have to at least pretend to believe this. Most philosophers in our universities advocate this point of view. From this point of view, God is nothing but an idea in human minds. And as an idea in human minds is nothing but the activity of certain particular regions of the brain, the nervous impulses and chemical transmitters. But there's no God out there. That's a naive, childish view that science has left far behind. That's the atheist view I used to have, and that's the atheist view I encounter all the time among my scientific colleagues. But the biggest problem with this materialist worldview, which is the subject of my book, The Science Delusion, or Science Set Free, I take the 10 dogmas of the materialist so-called scientific worldview and show that each one of these assumptions, if you look at it scientifically, turns out to fall apart. They unravel as soon as you stop accepting them in a credulous, unquestioning way. And the one that I'd like to address now briefly is the idea that matter's unconscious. This was an assumption of Descartes because he split matter off from spirit, which was immaterial, and made this sharp split. The materialists get rid of the spirit and they're just left with unconscious matter. Now, as you'll immediately see, this causes a massive problem straight away, because if matter's unconscious, how come that we're conscious, if the whole universe is meant to be unconscious? There's an enormous problem explaining human consciousness, and in philosophy of mind, this is called the hard problem. Because there's no known explanation for it. Matter should not be conscious, according to this theory. Philosophers of mind over the last 60 or 70 years have tied themselves in knots, trying to explain away consciousness. One school of thought says, well, consciousness exists, but it's like a meaningless shadow of the activity of the brain. It doesn't do anything. You don't have free will. It doesn't actually do anything. It's just a kind of shadow, an epiphenomenon of what's happening in your brain. Another lot say it's just another way of talking about the activity of the nervous system, and as we learn enough neurophysiology, then we'll be able to get rid of what they call folk psychology, talking in terms of subjectivity and consciousness, and everything will just become a matter of describing the neurophysiology of the brain. The third school are called eliminative materialists, who say consciousness doesn't exist at all. It's an illusion. The problem is, of course, that if it's an illusion can only exist in consciousness. So it's a kind of self-contradictory position. And so these materialist philosophers attack each other because they each disagree with the other one's theories, because they're all self-contradictory or implausible, but go round and round in circles. And this is the center of the problem in consciousness studies today. Until 20 years ago, scientists ignored consciousness. When I was studying science at Cambridge, it turned up for about 10 minutes in a physiology lecture, and that was it. The brain appears to be conscious. Philosophers argued about this for centuries. They've never got anywhere, so we'll leave them to waste their time on pointless arguments. We'll get on with explaining how the brain works. That was the attitude. And of course, we've understood a lot about how brains work, but it hasn't explained consciousness. A very interesting phenomenon is occurring right now. A few years ago, one of the top materialist philosophers of mind, Galen Strawson, jumped ship and stopped being a materialist. He adopted a theory called panpsychism instead. Panpsychism is the idea that there's pan means everywhere, psychism means psyche, as in mind or soul. That there's some kind of mind or soul throughout all nature. Even an electron has a kind of mind. And the idea there is that then consciousness can emerge in human brains because there are more primitive forms of consciousness in matter itself. Matter is not intrinsically unconscious or mindless. It has a kind of mind-like aspect. Interestingly, the top US philosopher of mind, Thomas Nagel, came out last year with a book adopting panpsychism. It caused shock and horror in the ranks of academic psychology and philosophy. He was viciously attacked by materialist philosophers of mind. His book is called Mind and Cosmos, subtitle, Why the Materialist Neo-Darwinian Conception of Nature is Almost Certainly False. And Nagel argues that it's incoherent to suggest that the mind can just emerge from unconscious matter. You have to have a panpsychist view. You have to have some kind of mind in nature already. He also thinks there has to be a kind of purpose in nature already, which is one of the biggest heresies in materialism, because evolution is supposed to be quite purposeless. And recently, Christoph Koch, K-O-C-H, who was Francis Crick's principal colleague in working on consciousness, came out 6 months ago in favor of panpsychism. That was a real surprise to me because he was one of the most hardline materialists that I've ever encountered.